Hey, Senda.
Hey, Phil.
Do you want to talk about splitting up the party?
Oh, yeah, like the song, right? Like, don't you know, don't ever split the party. The clerics in the back, get the fighters hailing hardy.
Oh, what about a story game?
Well, I don't know. That's a little different. I mean, there's reasons that you might, and then there's reasons you might not.
Cue music. And welcome to another episode of Panda's Talking Games, the first of 2020. I am your very disappointed I do not have a Neural Jack host, Phil.
And I am your other host, Senda.
And welcome to our first show of 2020.
Yeah.
So that's a thing. It is, the drop date is January 6th, assuming Senda remembered to schedule it to drop.
I'm sure future Senda has got a perfect handle on that.
Not our beginning of our year. This is actually the end of our recording year because we're heading into March. And sometime in March, we will reach the monumental 200th episode.
It's true.
Which will totally be a clips episode. We're not even going to do an episode. We're just going to put a whole bunch of clips. Actually, we're just going to run outtakes for the 200th episode.
No. You know what? We've discussed this before. If I put all the outtakes together into a single episode, because we tried to do this for the 100th one, right?
Right.
It was like 18 hours straight. And we've done 100 more shows.
Cut it down to just the funny ones.
You're saying this like it's easier to do that than to just record a show.
I'm kidding. All right. Anyway, welcome to 2020. Hope you had a lovely holiday season and that you are properly recovered physically, emotionally, financially, etc. We're going to do what we do normally, and we're back on our normal recording schedule for the foreseeable future until some cons start up. So we're just going to jump right in.
Sure. And before we do, we're going to run some quick ad copy from this week's sponsor, the Lucky Die podcast.
Up above, you see blood-red clouds boiling across the sky. I hear that you're about to go on an adventure.
You know how Emma likes to have me running around worrying about things.
You see armies at your back, dwarven, elven, human. You see all the races under your command, and you wickedly smile back at yourself.
We can do this the easy way, or we can do this the hard way.
And you see this light being shattered into 7 different pieces.
It's not worth the risk.
Just say it's part of my inquisitive nature.
I have been following you for a very long time.
Do you want a countdown? 3, 2, 1. Now. And you feel the world drop out from beneath you.
The Lucky Die podcast is a weekly 5e Dungeons & Dragons actual play podcast. Join our adventure every Monday wherever you download podcasts by searching for The Lucky Die.
And we have a topic for tonight, right?
We do indeed. Powell, a member of the Gauntlet community, reached out to us and said, I'd love to hear you talk about splitting this party in story games. Is it good or is it bad? I have friends who hate it and struggle massively with attention span when their character is not in the scene, while I love to have the party split and everyone doing something meaningful while we sometimes meet and act together.
Right. So conventional gaming wisdom says never split the party. Mm-hmm. So much so that there's a song written about it.
Split the
No,
party.
don't do it again.
No, okay.
But we actually know that never splitting the party is not exactly true, right? Like splitting the party is not awful.
Yeah. So tonight we're going to talk about splitting the party with the focus being on story games. But first, Phil, tell us, why does that bit of eternal gaming advice exist and what games does it apply to?
Right. So splitting the party, right? Splitting the party comes from the ye old days of role playing.
Yes.
But to define it, right, splitting the party is when a group of characters, right, like sometimes, referred to as the party in more classic tabletop role-playing games, divide up and progress in the game in parallel and in different spaces, right? So when we say split the party, right, we have like one group and they've gone east down the corridor and they are like, passing the lava jets. And we have another group, they've gone west and they have found like a hidden temple and they're like exploring the temple, right? So in linear game time, they're both progressing through linear game time in parallel.
Yes.
Okay. And they're physically in different spaces, right? So this is very different than having all the group in one area doing different things in a scene, right? Because that's a very different thing. You're just going around the table like, what are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing? Right? And they could all be doing different things, but they're in the same space together.
Right.
So splitting the party again, divide them up in parallels in different spaces, moving in parallel through game time.
Yep.
Okay. And again, this can be done, I said 2, but obviously you could break it up even more, right? You could break it down to individual characters if you wanted to. And I've done that in a game back in the 90s with Amber Diceless, and I can tell you it's miserable to be running a 6-player game where 6 players are not together.
Where 6 players are all doing different things.
Oh, it's brutal. We'll talk about it. We'll talk about why, right?
Yeah.
But the reason why this piece of advice, never split the party, has come up is because when you are divided up, each group has less resources and are often missing abilities from what the whole group has, right? Like, I mean, this should make sense, right? This is, if we think of something like a fantasy RPG, like a 5e or Pathfinder, right? Where we have classes and niches and abilities and stuff like that. When you split the party, right, you are at a somewhat of a disadvantage, right? So the group that doesn't have the cleric now doesn't have access to healing magics, right? Maybe they have potions or a wand or whatever, but they don't have the cleric.
Yeah.
The group that lacks the fighter is going to have someone else step into that role, or they're going to have to really alter their tactics to avoid getting into a straight up kind of tank fight.
Right.
Right. So there is a resource and tactical disadvantage in what we would say traditional tabletop role-playing games when you split a party.
Right. Which I think we can define for this particular instance as being games where encounters are developed for a specific set of people, and then you are encountering them with not that full party.
Yeah, so if you're like playing a published adventure where the published adventure kind of assumes that the party's going to be together and then your party doesn't do that,
right?
You run into this problem, right? If you are particularly writing this, if you are writing your own adventure and you're like, cool, I plan on having the party split up, right? Then probably if you kind of knew how they were going to split, you've written each part.
You can account for it, yeah.
Right, but even something like lack of healing magic is just a disadvantage in general.
It is, yeah. Okay, cool. So in addition to the player side, there's also the GMing side of splitting the party, which is that you're basically now as the GM managing multiple subtables, right? Like 2 or more, depending on how far you split up. And you have to run both of those subtables, and then you also have to keep both sets of people or all the sets of people from getting bored when it's not their turn, because they really are removed from that action and they can't really be involved in it.
Right, they have no agency in that sub scene.
Not at all, right? And you have to track the interactions between the two groups too, right? So like if you do something with group A and it causes a wall to fall in a cave somewhere else, you have to track that, to see if it affects group B.
Yeah.
And then you also have to manage timing everything so that the two groups can integrate when they choose to join up again. So basically you have to kind of keep things at least mostly synced in terms of timing and story on with all of the various parties that are out there so that you can bring them back together again in a reasonable and logical fashion.
Yeah. So when we get to story games, we don't often have, at least to the same degree, the same problem that we have in traditional games with the first part, which is the resource issue, right? Story games tend to have less intricate characters. They tend to abstract combat more. And so the niche dependency isn't quite as high. And it becomes really less of an issue in that part. But no matter what game you're playing, traditional, indie, story, whatever label you want to put on it, when you split the party, you always have to contend with the second part that Senda just talked about, right? Like that is always an issue.
Yep.
And that is where we get to Powell's question.
Right, because the question is not really is it good or bad, because as most things are in RPGs and life and, just life, there are no absolutes on this, right? So rather we're going to look at tips in story games for what it's like when you're keeping the party together versus what it's like when you split them apart.
Yep. So Senda, start us off and let's talk about what to do when you are keeping the party together.
Yeah, so basically, we're going to split this out into like things that are positives, things that are potential negatives, and then some like ideas about how to deal with those, right? So let's start with when you're all together, the things that you have, the things that you gain from that, right?
Right. So when you're together, you don't have like all the extra cognitive load, like all those GMing things.
Yes.
Right. Like you're not managing two or more subtables. So you're just managing one table.
Yeah. They're all in the same storyline right now.
So you definitely have that as an advantage, and you have all the players accessible in the scene for potential use and interaction.
Yeah.
Right. You're not waiting for so and so to come back, from the space station before they can be part of the story or interact. Like they're there.
Yeah. Everybody's there. So what are some of the things that we sacrifice by keeping everyone all together?
Right. So one of the things we sacrifice is the speed at which we can move through the plot, right? Because if the whole group has to go everywhere together, then you have to play out all the scenes going from place to place as a group, right? So when we talk about games that require collection of information or clues, if everybody has to go everywhere and you can't split up, then you have to basically touch all the spaces, right? Before you get to the end. And that can just take a long time.
Yep.
Possibly in game and possibly in real time.
Yeah.
And then we also sacrifice smaller, more intimate interactions, right? So we can certainly interact with members of the group in the group setting, but certain, especially in story games, certain plot lines, certain content and things like that, characters may only want to convey in private, right? In a more intimate or private setting. And so when we're all together, we don't have that.
Yeah.
So we wind up losing some of those potential kinds of scenes.
Right. So some thoughts on keeping everybody together or GMing when you have everyone together. We would say scenes should involve as many people in the party as you can make sense.
Yeah, so you want everyone, so if you're keeping everyone together and you have a scene, you want the narrative possibility for everyone to be able to participate in the scene.
Yeah.
If they all have to go together, then everybody should have a chance to do something.
Right.
Right?
Right. If they're all going together, it shouldn't be just about the wizard has to do this one thing, but everyone else has to stand there and stare while they do it.
Correct.
Right?
That's not
fun.
That's not fun.
Cool.
Right.
So when a character is not directly involved in whatever's specifically happening at that moment, you can always ask them what their thoughts or feelings are about what's going on, or basically pull them in other ways too, right?
Yeah, I always like that if you just ask them like, hey, the wizard's giving up like a lot of information here. Like, are you comfortable with that?
Right.
Like just those kind of needling leading questions, right? We've talked about leading questions before, but just like needling them, like it just gets them thinking, like it puts them in the character. It keeps them in character space.
Right. And the answer might be no, they're not comfortable, and then they react, right? And then stuff happens, which is also great.
Drama.
Right. Hooray for drama.
Hooray for drama. All right. Some scenes are going to naturally focus on one or a few characters. Like, that's inevitable. You can't make every scene be about the entire party. But what you do need to do as a GM is that subsequent scenes need to focus on different characters, right? The entire adventure cannot be going scene to scene with the focus on the wizard and the cleric dealing with this thing and the rest of the party there as sidekicks, right? Like, It needs to be like, in this scene, the wizard and the cleric are going to do this magical research. In the next scene, the fighter and the thief are kind of the focus as we're stealing this thing, like, et cetera, et cetera. Like, you gotta make sure, if you're keeping them all together, you're kind of rotating who's the focus in the scene.
Can I just point out something that's really funny that just struck me?
What's that?
We're specifically talking about story games, but all of our examples are like really traditional.
It's easy to use things like it's easy to use those examples because like
it
people can
highlights
grasp onto
really,
it.
really easily. But it there was a certain amount of irony. Yeah. So some more general advice is to keep the scenes productive by knowing what your scene is about. Like, what are you trying to accomplish with this scene, so that you can start close to that goal and then you can close it when you've achieved it. So like, get to the monkey, and then unless, if your players are having lots of fun playing role-playing stuff at the table afterwards, cool, awesome, let it breathe, that's your call. But, end the scene when it still, has good punch and not when it just slowly dies.
Yeah, because you're going to have the whole group together.
Yeah.
And if you don't start to wrap the scene because there's a time there's a balance here, right? This is not a thing that is easily teachable as much as it's a thing you understand.
This is an art.
There's a time when the chatter at the table is productive and you want to let the scene breathe a little, open it up and let it go. And there's a time where it's not productive. The players are still chattering. And if you don't start capping that scene, because they're all together and they're all interacting with each other and they start arguing about like
you'll never move
who
on.
stole who stole the cheese in the last town, like your game is going to grind to a halt.
Are you describing my game group? I'm feeling so called out right now.
Right. So the thing is to that is like there's an art form for this interaction is productive. It is moving the story in a positive direction. We are more dramatic, whatever. And then there's these players, bless their hearts, won't shut up. And the story's not going anywhere.
They're stuck.
Right. So you got to know when to turn it off, right? And when to let it breathe.
Yeah,
okay.
It's an art.
Another piece of advice is encourage group decisions and group actions. If you have them all together, they should all be doing stuff together. So if somebody is trying to alpha game and is just calling the shots, like as the GM, get in there and make them make group decisions. And if your game has group action mechanisms like the extended trouble in Things from the Flood and Tales from the Loop, I think there's a couple other games that have group actions or
Hydro
aided actions or whatever.
Just going to say.
What's that?
Hydro Hackers,
right. Has a group action. Like use those, encourage those actions because they involve the group. Mm-hmm. Okay, cool.
Cool. And then have each scene contribute more material that helps you get closer to the climax. So more clues and info in a single space so that there's stuff for everybody to interact with that everybody gets to help move that forward, or more things to be done in one space that is still moving that plot forward too. So if you have a hacker who's going to hack the mainframe, then somebody has to hold off the guards and somebody else has to deal with the fact that the sprinklers are going off or whatever it is,
Exactly. Yep. Okay, so when we're talking about splitting up a party, right, like before, we gain a few things.
Yeah, so you have more opportunities for one-on-one PC and NPC interactions, or even just small group interactions between PCs and NPCs. And you can gather a lot more information and clues simultaneously in game time.
Yes, in game time.
In game time, yeah.
Correct. And we sacrifice a few things.
Yeah, not everyone is involved in each of those subscenes. So there are people who are sitting out, and it can make the game take longer in real time, even though you're compressing game time because you are doing more scenes, right? And you're doing more work as a GM, so you're picking up a little bit more cognitive load because you are balancing all of those sub-scenes.
Exactly. All right. So here's a few tips. The first one, and this is again, some of these tips are going to sound familiar because they have a lot to do with scene management, which is exactly what we're talking about here.
Yep.
The first one is aggressive spotlight management is going to be the key, right? So if you have multiple groups, as much as possible, you got to keep moving the spotlight. This is what Powell's talking about people being bored.
Yeah.
People are bored when the spotlight shifts to one subscene and stays there for a while because no one else can act.
Yes.
No one else has agency in the scene or anything else. So aggressive spotlight management of moving the spotlight from one subscene to another, to another, to another, and around and around and around keeps that time for people sitting out to be smaller and smaller.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, the only exception to that rule that I will state is if you luck into a table where everyone is so fascinated by the story that is playing out in front of them, that's cool. It's great.
Yeah. If a scene needs to breathe a little, but even then, you can always cliffhanger and switch the spotlight.
Oh yeah. And that's just make sure that if you see people getting bored, move it around. And then telegraph when you're going to change the spotlight, right? Because if people know that their turn is coming up, then they will be more likely to be engaged waiting for their turn to come up. So you can say...
Or at least re-engage,
Or
right?
re-engage when their turn comes up and kind of have a plan and an idea and not be like, oh, what? Oh, right? So you can say to them things like, we're going to see how this interaction between Corrin and the Warlord goes, and then we're going to jump over to Bardic out in the Grove, right? And so you've set expectations, which is great. Setting expectations is really good. It's very helpful. Do it.
Absolutely. Use the players that are not in the scenes, right? Farm those players who are sidelined for information, ideas, hit them with some leading questions, right? Like, ask them to fill in details, let them play an NPC, whatever. Like, you can pull them in without pulling them in as their characters into those scenes.
Right. When time permits, open up scenes and let them explore one-on-one interactions, right? So don't be afraid to switch spotlights, but also just... It's that art again, right? It's that art of knowing when other people are all yawning or whatever, or doing that body language thing that you're like, oop, everybody else is out of it, but these two are really in it. Find a cut point, whether it's a cliffhanger, whatever, and then move it on. But, you know, those scenes are one of the joys that you get out of splitting the party when you can get some of the really smaller interactions where there's more intimate moments between characters.
Absolutely. Spreading out information and clues. So now that you have different groups running off to go do different things, if you are playing something like a mystery or investigation, you can put your clues in many different places because the group can split up and cover more ground. So go ahead and put a clue out in the graveyard, and then put a clue in the library, and put a clue over at the museum, and then have the group break up into like pairs of 2 or 1s and 2s or whatever and go investigate those things, right? Because in game time, they're doing all those things in parallel, so they'll actually find all their clues faster in game time.
Yeah. And then when you need to resync the groups, pick a place that's a little bit further like ahead in time to resume the narrative so that you don't have to worry about exact timings of people lining up and stuff, right? So this might be like after you visit the crime scene, Andy wraps up her analysis at the lab, and then everybody meets up for dinner, or where are you meeting? Like, what's your favorite diner or whatever? Or you can literally just say to them things like, cool, it's been about 3 hours and everyone's done. Where are you all together now?
Exactly, right? So you just set a point a little further ahead so that all lines sync back up.
Yep. Even if somebody's task took a little longer than somebody else's.
Exactly,
just
right.
Make it,
Yep, perfect. Mm-hmm. All right, so the bottom line to this is don't be afraid to split the party in any game.
Sorry, that deserved a gasp, right? So, but understand what you gain and what you lose when you split the party versus keeping them together.
Right? It's a GMing tool.
Yeah.
Right? So there are times when the story demands that a group be split up, and there are times when it demands that the group should stay together, and you should just follow that. Like, you shouldn't force it. You shouldn't force it in any direction. Follow what the story's telling you.
Yeah. So our general advice is that your default should probably be to keep everyone together and then split them off sort of as the story demands or as the offbeat, right?
Yeah, because if you're mostly together and then on occasion you split up, that's a different kind of workload than you're all split up and sometimes you're together.
Yes. Yeah.
It's a very different workload for the GM.
Yep. Agree.
All right, cool. And with that, we're going to join up, you and I,
and
do the closing of the show. But before we do, Senda's going to tell us about another show on the Misdirected Mark Network.
Indeed. On the Gnomecast, several gnomes from Gnome Stew get together and talk about gaming topics and themselves in an effort to entertain you and avoid being thrown into the stew.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Senda, where can people reach us on the internet?
Well, you can find us on Twitter at Pandas Talk Games. You can find us in the Misdirected Mark forums. Wow, forums. Check us out there. Or you can drop us an email if you prefer, panda@misdirectedmark.com. And Phil, once they find us in one of those places, what can they do with that information?
Please, like Powell did, send us your topics. We love doing these shows about the things that you find interesting, the questions you have and such. And we would like to just keep continuing to do that, but we can only do that if you send us your topics. So please send us your topics and we will figure out a way to make them into shows.
It's true.
If you like what we do here elsewhere on the Misdirected Mark Network, please consider supporting our Patreon campaign. Go to patreon.com/MMP. Patrons of the show get access to the bonus outtakes from this show, which there will be some. As well as the Misdirected Mark After Show. You get access to our show notes. Probably the biggest draw is you get access to our Slack room for life, which is just a great collection of human beings chatting and having a really fun time talking about life and games and stuff like that. I really love our community quite a bit. Our Slack community is amazing. You can come play Minecraft with us on the Minecraft server. That's always a fun time. There are other goodies from time to time that we are able to sprinkle about to our patrons. We also like to do shout outs to our patrons. This week, we're shouting out to Toby Sennett, the Baron of Britannia. T. Acoustic, who has played Minecraft on the shared server with us, although in very many time zones separated. Like it took some pretty heroic efforts to
try and catch him.
But T. Acoustic, an excellent Minecrafter, very, very, very good builder. And Jeremy Mayer. Thank you all very much, and everyone else who continues to support the show. Honestly, it would be pretty hard to damn near impossible to do this without your support, so we appreciate it greatly. In addition, if you are already supporting the Patreon campaign, which is awesome, and if you are unable to support the Patreon campaign, which we totally understand, there's another thing you can do that helps people find us, because that's the next thing we really need to do is have people find us.
Yes, please.
Since we know that once you listen to us, you will like us, we just need more people to find us to figure out that they actually like us.
Right, like that.
And you can help with that.
So
how can they help?
You can leave us a rating or review on Apple Podcasts or the podcatcher of your choice, because all the algorithms that make podcasts show up when people type in search terms like RPG are based on things like stars and reviews. So we super duper 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 appreciate it when you give us a rating or review like that, because it actually really does help people find our show, which is great.
It's super great.
It's super great.
So, Senda.
Yeah.
Show me what your plan is for how you're going to split up your party in the next game.
This show is a joint production of She's a Super Geek and Misdirected Mark Productions, the media arm of Encoded Designs.
Show me what you got, eh? Show me what you got. Show me what you got, eh? Show me what you got. Show me what you got, eh? Show me what you got. Show me what you got.
Bloopky.
Clicky.
I mean, Can I tell you that part of the reason that I remembered that last time you accidentally had your cursor over the hang up button instead of the record button is because then on Saturday, I recorded Descent into Midnight, and I almost did the same thing. I was like, wait, this is the wrong red button.
It's a red button.
I mean, we sang songs about it and stuff, so how could I forget? Bloop.
The shiny red button.
Wrong red button.
Shiny red button is a Ren and Stimpy reference.
Oh, okay.
Ren and Stimpy was a cartoon
different.
From the 90s.
I remember Ren and Stimpy. I probably shouldn't have been watching it.
No, at your age, you probably shouldn't have.
It's log, something to something.
It's big, it's heavy, it's wood. It's log, it's log.
It's better than bad, it's good. See.
Oh, I watched a lot of Ren and Stimpy. Don't Pee on the Electric Fence and Powdered Toast Man.
Ren and Stimpy, but I don't really remember it because I was not very old yet.
I was in college, and that
Gosh, you were in college. That means I was like 8 or 9.
You were like 10 or 11. Bloop. I see. Now my Nickelodeon was different from yours because 80s Nickelodeon. So 80s Nickelodeon was like dominated by two things. You can't do that on television.
Yeah, I remember that one though. That was something that I also watched a lot of.
That show was brilliant. I loved You Can't Do That on television.
Yeah.
And Double Dare.
Double Dare was also awesome. Oh my God.
They'd have a thing like they'd have a giant nose full of slime. And it was
you had
like
to dig for the flag up its nostril.
Yeah, yes. Exactly.
Yes, Double Dare.
Double Dare.
The best. Bloop.
Anyway.
The thing about Double Dare, though, was like they always just got so gross.
Oh, the Double Dare
which I super enjoyed as a child, even though I personally was not a gross. I guess now I'm not into like gross slimy things. Like I don't like that. But like as a kid, I was always like outside playing with the mud and the hose.
Yeah, I mean, Double Dare knew its audience.
Oh yeah, they nailed it. They nailed it.
It was purposely gross, like it was
in a funny way.
Everything about it was done in a funny way, like the slime, the boogers,
like the having to dive
pudding
stomach
like
first
pudding,
into a giant tub of something squishy.
Right. Yeah. It was great. Like it was great. It was a time show, or it was a time, like they were timed contests. They were silly. They were ridiculous.
And gross.
Pretty much everything about that show was perfect for its target demographic. Like,
yes.
Later, like when I was in college, like we would watch American Gladiators because, I'm old enough that we didn't have cable in our dorm.
Oh, I didn't have a TV. I guess there was cable in my dorm, but like I didn't have anything to watch it on.
We had a TV, like a small, like I think we had like a 17 or 19-inch TV or something. And then like one of my roommates brought a TV. I brought a VCR and an NES.
Right. From the Magic Christmas.
From the Magic Christmas, right? That's exactly where it was from.
Yeah.
And yeah, like we just like we put together like an entertainment center. But I always had a TV in my dorm, but it was always broadcast. Like you had to have, rabbit ears and had to, get it to tune
Wiggle
in.
it around and stuff.
And then really what we did was the TV was basically just to watch videotapes, right? Like we brought a whole mess of videotapes, and like every semester would be like dominated by one or two
specific movies that everybody would get into.
No, but like one year, my junior year, I watched. I had almost no finals because my grades were high enough that a couple of my classes I was exempt out of the final.
Right.
And a couple of my other classes, like I had to get like a 40 to get an A in the class.
Right. So you were just like, show up, put my name on the paper.
Yeah. So I wasn't studying terribly hard. But I watched Days of Thunder 27 times in 1 week.
My God.
It's not that good of a movie, let me tell you. But like I learned like every line from that movie. There was a point in my life where I could quote pretty much the whole movie. And again, not the best use of brain cycles or time.
I used to do the same thing like after school every day. I had like a list.
But with good movies.
Robin Hood,
Anime?
Men in Tights. I mean,
Men in Tights is arguably a better. Men in Tights. I shouldn't say arguably. Men in Tights is a better movie than Days of Thunder.
Okay, I mean that's fair. I haven't seen Days of Thunder, so I don't know. So
you will one day.
It was boy, and you're going to quote the whole thing to me as I watch it, right?
I'm just going to quote the key parts too.
Okay, so it was Robin Hood, Men in Tights. It was the Disney animated Robin Hood for a little while. It was the Court Jester, and it was and Return of the Jedi. And I'm trying to think if any of like that was them.
What about Disney Musketeers?
Oh, that one was amazing, but I didn't own it. If I had owned it, what happened was every time I went to my friend's house who owned it, we always watched it. But I didn't own it. So I watched it a lot, but it wasn't under my control.
I love that movie.
It's so good. It's so damn good.
And we even watched it. It's
still so good.
Right. We watched it like a year or two ago.
I know.
And it lost nothing.
It's still
it was
amazing.
Yep.
Yeah.
I like the casting of absolutely every character in that movie, right? Like bloop, meow.
We need to stop meowing because I just crack up every time.
Hey, Senda.
Hey, Phil.
Do you want to talk about splitting up the party?
I mean, I don't remember the song. Shit. Oh, I remember it. Now I remember it.
Back to the top. Here we go.
You remember how we were like, maybe we could do just an intentional outtake there, and then we were like, no, we won't.
No,
We'll just
don't
do
worry.
it.
You
It'll
got
be
it.
fine. And then I just totally fucked it up naturally.
Bum, bum.
Do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do.
Bum, ba-dum, bum.
Doink.
Bum, bum.
Oh, he did the head even.
I know.
I
People
thought we
haven't
were in a
had-
hurry, and then
No, but
and then you
people
kept
haven't
going.
had that in a little while. I thought I'd give them a little taste.
The people meaning me.
The people. There are other people. There are other people who listen.
I know, but they can't see you do the Muppet head. That's just for me. I get the Muppet head. It's like my special moment.
Couldn't cyberpunk that fast, huh? That's okay.
This is not my genre of choice.
And welcome to our.
You made my
first-
eyes get all big.
Show me what you got.
Show me what you got. Show me what you got. Show me what you got.
And with that, want to say goodbye?
Yeah, bye.
Bye, everybody. And